One of the metaphors that I use, or the analogies that I use to try to explain to students one of the ways I think about how we get better at things like the SAT or the ACT, is to think about how the SAT or the ACT, how these tests are like chess. And what do I mean by that? So let's ask the question, what makes grandmasters, they're the big, super skilled chess players, what makes grandmasters so good at chess? And there's a lot of things. It's not just one factor, but there's one factor that gets a lot of discussion and one factor that's relevant for our discussion for the SAT and ACT. And what they're good at is pattern recognition. So when they see a board, obviously this is just the starting position, but imagine if we were in some other position in the middle of a game. To a novice, I'm not really good at chess at all, but when I see a board, I see the individual pieces. I don't really see anything that I recognize. I don't see any patterns. Whereas people who are skilled at chess, grandmasters, for example, they see patterns. They see configurations of the pieces that they have seen before in their tens of thousands of games and their tens of thousands of practice hours studying and playing. They see these patterns, they recognize them, and they can make decisions based on how they have acted on those patterns in the past or how those patterns have played out in the past, right? So they're drawing on their knowledge of chess, which they've built over many years, to, instead of seeing pieces as individuals, to see them in configurations, to see, oh, I've seen this kind of setup before. I've seen these individual things fitting together in this way, and therefore I know the best moves are X and Y and Z. So pattern recognition, and this is, I think, a general point about any kind of skill. So how do doctors read X-rays, or how do computer programmers read code and see where the bugs or the problems might be? It's over many years of practice, you see patterns, and that's what humans are really good at, seeing patterns and acting on that. So how does this apply to the SAT? Well, take a question like this. So take a minute, try this question out on your own, and then we will talk about it. Okay, so if x squared minus y squared equals 16 and x plus y equals 8, what is the value of x minus y? So if you're a novice to the test, or maybe you just haven't done a lot of studying, or maybe this is not an area that you're very good with, whatever it might be, perhaps you looked at this and, again, kind of like the analogy to the chess, you saw its individual pieces. You saw the x squared minus the y squared equals 16, the x plus y equaling 8, wanting to know the value of x minus y. Perhaps you went along the lines of trying to do some kind of substitution, right? So maybe you said, okay, if x plus y equals 8, then x would equal 8 minus y. And then I could maybe substitute that in for x. And then I would get 8 minus y squared equals 16. And then you'll factor this out. You'll get a quadratic. You'll solve for y. And, you'll get the answer eventually. And that's totally fine. Maybe, though, you saw this and you didn't even know what to do at all. Maybe you just had no idea what to do because you had, maybe perhaps what you started to do is plug in numbers for x and y. Maybe like 10 or like 6 and 2. And then does 6 and 2 work? No. How about 4 and 4? Does that work? No. Right? So maybe you plugged in numbers. So what is the grandmaster move? What is the pattern recognition? So when I see this question, what I see is something that I've seen before. And when I've seen this before, there's been a very profitable approach to answering a question like this. And what I've seen before is this pattern. X squared minus y squared. What is this? This is the difference of two perfect squares. And I know from experience that when you see the difference of two perfect squares, what you need to do is factor this, right? When this factors, you're going to get x plus y, x minus y. Now, you might realize, well, wait a minute, x plus y, x minus y, that's exactly what I have, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. So I know that this equals 16. And I know that x plus y equals 8, so I can make that substitution directly. So x minus y equals 16. And now I can just divide both sides by 8. I get x minus y equals 2. And I'm done. It's just 2. So when you see the pattern, when you first see that, oh, I can factor this, and that luckily equals just the things I was looking for, when you can realize on questions like these that you generally, if they're looking for the difference of x minus y, we generally don't have to find the value of x and then generally find the value of y and subtract them. Instead, what we can do is solve for x minus y directly, which is what we do here. When you see those two things, and this comes from experience this is more of an SAT question than an ACT question, but it could apply to the ACT. It comes from experience that I've seen these problems before, I've seen these patterns, and I recognize them and I know where to go. And that is really the key to doing well on particularly ACT and SAT math questions. Now, this gets to the final point, which sometimes students say, well, I need to think faster. How do I think faster? How do I read faster? Is that something I need to do because maybe I don't have enough time and I need to keep going and I need to get faster so I can finish the section? And what I always say is it's not really about thinking or reading faster, because you really can't. You can, but it's hard to increase your base level of how fast your neurons fire and things like that, right? It's very hard to increase that, and perhaps impossible. But what you can get better at is getting better at recognizing patterns, so that instead of looking at a question and having to take apart its pieces and say, okay, here's this little piece, here's this little piece, here's this little piece, how do they fit together? How do I take this to get to an answer? Instead of that, you look at a question and say, oh, I've seen this kind of thing before. I know the general approaches that are useful to tackling this. So all I need to do is try this approach, or maybe try this approach. So that's how you think faster. You don't think faster by thinking really hard and hoping your neurons fire faster. You think faster by recognizing patterns. And when you recognize patterns, you chunk the material in such a way that you can process it more efficiently. So think when you're studying, whether it's SAT or ACT, whether it's math or even reading or writing, think about patterns, right? And in the end, it comes back down to the main lesson, which is practice, practice, practice is key, right? You need to put in the time so that you can recognize those patterns, so that you can deploy the best strategies when you see those patterns recur on your test. To learn more about Reason Prep's SAT, SAT subject test, and ACT video courses, go to reasonprep.com/enroll. And you can find the link in the description below the video.